If you are new to sewing and you think this is too complicated or difficult for you, you would be wrong, friends. It has no zippers, no snaps, no buttons, nothing. It has a tie closure. It is a gorgeous quilted book sleeve, and I'm gonna show you how to make it. So what you need to cut is one piece of 13 by 18 fabric and then a matching 13 by 18 piece of liner fabric. Now, if you're cutting directional for the exterior piece, make sure that you're cutting it correctly because your piece is going to fold like this. And so if you have directional fabric, make sure you're cutting it to where it would be going up and down this way. And then you need 2 strips of 16 by 2 3/4 inch strips. I like to use the liner pieces. These are gonna be our ties. And then you also need an oversized piece of batting. I'm using polyester because that's what I have on hand. You can use low loft, high loft, cotton batting. You could even use fusible fleece. I think this is a 20 by 15 inch, but you could, as long as it's about an inch wider and longer than your exterior piece. You also need quilt clips. Optional is basting spray if you have it. I absolutely love this stuff. I use it all the time whenever I'm quilting pieces. Snips. And another optional piece is a really thin dowel rod. I got this at Walmart in the crafting section, and I use it to help me turn out tubes and stuff. Lay your batting piece down and give it a little spritz if you're using basting spray, and then center your exterior piece on top. Smooth. Now you're going to want to prepare your quilting lines. Now everyone does it differently. Some people have a quilting bar that comes with their machine, and you can just measure how far out to put it. If you have a scorer, you can use your ruler to create your scoring lines. I have a laser light on my machine, so I'm going to use that. I personally love the crosshatch look on this, but you can do vertical lines, you can do squares. I'm going to do a crosshatch because I think it gives it a really nice classic look. I'm going to set my width at about 2 inches. If you have a quilting foot, I would attach that now. My machine doesn't use a quilting foot. It has settings that I adjust instead. Once you make your first line, and I actually do like to score my first line when I'm doing like corner to corner, just to make sure it's straight. A little note about that: when you are quilting lines, once you've made your first line, do not watch your presser foot. I know that sounds like a bad idea, but once I smooth my fabric down, put the presser foot down, and get it started, you want to be watching your quilt line, whether it's your bar, if you have that lined up, if it's a scoring line, if it's a laser light. You want to watch this line to make sure you're following it and it's straight and your lines don't end up wonky. Now when you go to quilt the opposite side, like if you're doing crosshatch or squares, like a patchwork style, once you've done all your lines across one side and you come to do the opposite direction, always make sure you smooth down this little corner before you start sewing, because if you don't, like let's say it was a little bunched, and then once you start sewing, it's going to create a pucker right here. So just always make sure to just smooth it down so you don't get that pucker. See, it just did it. And so I'm gonna smooth it down again. I accidentally bumped it with my knee. Now we're just going to trim off that excess on all sides. The reason we make the batting a little bit bigger than our actual piece is because it can shift during the quilting process, and you don't want to have a little sliver of fabric that doesn't have any batting underneath it. And if you're new to sewing, totally normal to just toss some scraps on the floor and sweep it up later. Okay, so now that we have this piece finished, we are going to fold it right sides together and line up those corners, and we're going to clip all sides, and then you're just going to sew on either side here and here. You're not going to sew the top because that part is going to be open when we're finished. So with your ruler, and if you have a marking pencil, if you don't have a marking pencil, just a regular pencil works. So with the corners, you're going to kind of open it like this and then lay it flat. It should naturally just lay straight down, but just kind of make sure that your seam that you just created is parallel with the other seam that you created so that it's straight. And then we're going to measure a 2-inch line and mark it. And then I like to use quilt clips just to hold that in place where I want it, and then repeat on the other side. And you're going to sew across those lines. Make sure you backstitch on both sides of your corner. As far as this seam goes, you can either open it and sew across it flat, but if you do that, we're going to do the same when you get up here, or you can lay it to one side. It is purely preference. We're going to snip off those ends and then set your exterior piece to the side. And now we're going to prepare our ties. So when you're working with fabric like this that looks the same on both sides, you're not really sure which side is the right side or the wrong side. Whenever I'm cutting them, I make sure to put them face up so I can remember. I mean, if you get them backwards, it's okay. I mean, they pretty much look the same. But we are just going to fold those in half, right sides together, and press. Also, just a note of caution, you see me using my wool mat on my cutting mat. I do this a lot, but I do not do it so much that like the heat is going to come through on the other side and mess up my cutting mat. If you're doing like bulk prepping or whatever, I would not recommend doing this on your cutting mat. Now, when we sew these, we want to have this little angle at the bottom. It makes it look really nice. And so what I do is I start at one end and I sew at an angle. I don't measure, it's not really necessary. I sew at an angle and then sew all the way down and just leave one end of the tube open. So you're creating a tube, and I'm going to show you how to turn it right side out when we get to it. This is where you're going to use your dowel rod. Now, if you don't have a dowel rod, or if you're not sure you can make that step happen, there is an alternative thing that you could do for the ties. What it would do though, when you're cutting, instead of 2 3/4 width, you would need to double that. And then you, instead of just folding it in half once, I'm going to show you with this scrap piece what you could do. You're going to fold it in half, press, and then you'd open it up and fold it in half on itself and press again. And interfacing is not necessary for these kind of ties. We want them to be nice and floppy and dainty, and then you would fold that over again and press. Okay, two things. You would still leave one end open, but to compensate for this end, what you would want to do is kind of fold that in. So essentially you would just close it after you fold and press that down. You would just close it, and then you would stitch from here over and then all the way down to close up that opening. I personally like the tube method so that we can get that angle on there for the ties. So with the folded over edge facing that way, like here's the opening, I'm going to start about right here, and then I'm going to stitch at an angle and then sew all the way down. Now, to get a really nice turnout on the tie when we get to the next step, you don't want to start sewing right on the edge of your fabric over here. We want a little bit of space right there to make some notches for our corner. we're going to snip off the very end right there, and we're going to create just a little bit of notching all along the edge there so it turns very nicely on the next step. Okay, I'm going to show you two different ways that I turn these out. I know there are turner tools out there. I need to get some, but if you're a beginner, you probably don't have that. So the first way, I'll do one on each tube. This only works if your straw that you have, these are literally drinking straws from our kitchen. This only works if the straw is wider than the dowel rod that you have. And so on one of the open ends, put the straw in and just go like this. Almost all the way. Don't go all the way to the end. I kind of leave about an inch or two here, and then take your dowel rod and just kind of rest it. And just kind of rest it right here in your straw, and then go like this and just push it up. And then dowel rod's already in there. I don't remember if I just figured this out myself a long time ago, or I saw it on a tutorial. I don't remember, but for years this is how I did it, because I didn't want to spend money on a bunch of sewing tools. And then you just pull it down just like that. Now the caveat here is, like, sometimes before you press, like, you want to make sure all those seams are pressed out all the way, and I just put my dowel rod like back in there, and then I hold it down before I press it. Now the other way is still with the dowel rod. Again, assuming you don't have turner tools, it's a little bit wonky, but it's the best that we can do. So you're going to take your blunt end of your dowel rod, and you're going to kind of try to open the fabric a little bit. This is the sewn end, and you're kind of gonna just put it, you're kind of going to do the same thing where you turn it out like we did with the straw. So I'm literally just pushing the fabric on there, and I'm kind of getting it started, and then I'm just grabbing little bits of it and wiggle. And see, there's a little hole in there now where my dowel rod was. And so now I can just wiggle it all the way down. Again, this is not ideal, but if you don't have any tools at home, a dowel rod is like $1 at Walmart, and you can just run down and grab one real quick and do it this way. Now, once you have your straps done, you can do a top stitch all the way around if you want. It's purely preference. I chose not to, just because I really like the floppiness of the ties. There's no interfacing in here. There's no top stitching. It's just a floppy tie. I don't think adding a top stitching is going to affect the floppiness. It's just your preference. Now you're going to grab your liner piece and fold it right sides together and clip or pin. Then we take this to our machine. You're going to sew up both sides again, leaving the top open. And this is a really important step. Make sure you're using the same 1/4 inch seam allowance for the liner as you did the exterior, because when we go to put the liner inside of it, we need the top to match up evenly and there not to be any bunching. This is a critical step. Before we even do the corners down here, you want to make sure that your liner is the same width as far as where you put your stitching as your exterior piece. So what I do is I line up where this stitching is and this stitching is, and then I pull it across. It's just like this when we make tote bags, and then I line up these stitches. Okay. And if there's any unevenness at all, like let's say that my liner stitch ended up over here, but my exterior stitching is right here. I hope you can see that in the camera. I'll try to zoom in for you. Then there's going to be bunching on the lining when we're getting to the next step, and it's going to look bad. So before you go any further, you need to fix it. You need to take your liner piece back to your machine. So just for the sake of showing you what I do, like let's say my liner stitching was way over here, I would just take a quilt clip, and wherever I need to start my stitching, I would just mark it with the quilt clip. This is actually plaid fabric, and so it'd be much easier to just look at where the squares are. But let's say you're not using gingham fabric, and it wouldn't be as hard. You can just use a quilt clip to mark where you need to make your new line and then trim off the excess. The reason that happens sometimes is the exterior piece doesn't shrink, but the quilting process makes the fabric bunt like shrink in a little bit on itself, sometimes up to 1/4 of an inch. And so we just want to make sure our pieces line up so there's no bunching. Now, if you're good to go, we can move on to the corners. Now for the exterior piece, we measured 2 inches. So open up your piece, it's still wrong sides out, and lay it flat to make the corner. Now take it to your machine and stitch those corners, remembering to back stitch when you start and when you stop. Okay, now we're going to turn our lining right side out. Push out those corners, and we're going to put it in our exterior piece, and then we're going to line up the side seams first and clip. You like my Buc-ee's bucket? And then lay it down flat, and you're going to find the center and mark it. So if it's 13 inches, that's going to be at 6.5. And that's where we're going to place our ties. So we want the curved edge to go on the inside. And so we're going to place it in between these 2 layers. Just kind of, I like fold it up a little bit, as long as it's not twisted. Just kind of go like that. Actually, let's go ahead and clip it. That'll be helpful. And we're just going to place it there on the inside and line it up with the center marking that you made and clip it. I like to let mine poke out just a little bit, just to make sure that I'm catching all of these layers. And then go ahead and line up your 2 layers and clip. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other side. You might have to push the line down in there a little bit. And now this side's easy. You don't even need to mark it. You just want to line it up exactly where that other one is. Now we're going to take this to our machine and stitch all the way around. Now whenever you're sewing multiple layers like this, I always make sure I'm like smoothing down that lining as I go, because it can easily get bunched. Even though you have it clipped, it's just kind of messy right now. So with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we are going to stitch all the way around, smoothing the lining as we go. And when you get to the ties, you're going to back stitch. Now these ties are not going to get a lot of like weight pulled on them like maybe a keychain wallet fob would, but we're just going to back stitch over them anyways, just to make sure they're never going to come out. Now you're going to pull that lining out, and where you left the hole, you're going to reach in there and pull it out gently. Try not to rip your stitches as you pull this out. If you do, it's okay. we can fix it. And then through the hole, I like to poke through the corners there. Oh my gosh, y'all. I did good on this fabric pairing. It looks so good. This is vintage fabric. This is from the vintage fabric haul on a previous video. And then this is from Walmart. Okay, so now you've got this floppy mess and we want to close this hole up. They should naturally, the sides of the fabric should naturally go in together, but if they don't, just kind of push them in and we can give it a little press. And whenever you're turning stuff right side out, sometimes you get these stringies at the opening. You can just tug on those and give them a little snip and just stitch that open and close real quick. Now push the lining back in. We're almost done and it looks so good. Push that lining in, push in the corners. Now there's two ways you can finish it from here. You can leave the lining just like that. So when you push it back in, it will naturally stay like that. I personally think that is gorgeous. And you could just iron this down and stitch it like that. Or if you like the completely finished look like this, on this one, I pushed the lining back in and I lined up where the seam meets right here and I pressed that real good. Either way, it is purely preference. Okay, I think that looks so stinking cute. So I'm gonna leave it just like that and I'm gonna press all the way around. Gosh, that's gonna make a pretty picture. Now, what you do wanna do if you're doing it this way is you wanna make sure that it's even all the way around. So like right here, it looks like this. When I get over here, it's looking a little bigger. So I just wanna make sure I'm folding that in the way it's supposed to. Oh, and we're clipping just to make sure it stays and it's even all the way around. I usually do this part on my ironing board on the end where I can just put this on the end of the ironing board and go around like this and it's much easier. Amazing how just a couple pieces of fabric can turn into this. I am so happy with this, friends. This would be a great gift, like if you're giving someone a book for Christmas or something, or for their birthday. This would be a great, cute way to gift it to them. Friends, I really enjoyed sewing with you today. Let me know down in the comments what you want to see next, and I hope you found this helpful and encouraging. I will see you soon, friends. Make sure you like and subscribe to see more crafty content, and I will see you later. Bye.